Well, the current median forecast is for 3 rate increases this year, something you have called a reasonable expectation. If you don't move in March, do you start to run out of time? In other words, is there an advantage to going sooner rather than later?
Well, again, given where we are in the economy, where the labor market is, the momentum we're seeing, I think there are some arguments for and, of course, against moving earlier rather than later. But I do think that, I wouldn't want to be too timid or delay too long this path of rate increases. I think the economy justifies a gradual pulling back on monetary accommodation, if you will. Let's take our foot gradually off the gas. I think this economy is proving that it can grow at a steady rate with, reaching our inflation goal without as much monetary stimulus as we've been giving.
In her December news conference, Janet Yellen warned the economy doesn't really need a whole lot of fiscal stimulus now. Do you worry that we might get too much?
Well, the way I think about it again is, in terms of our goals of full employment and for inflation. So there's a lot of things that affect that, and we'll be watching those and analyzing those in terms of the economic outlook. My view is that fiscal policy in general really should be focused primarily at this juncture on long-term issues like productivity growth, in terms of infrastructure or other things that can really affect the longer-term outlook of the economy. But whatever happens in terms of the economy here in the U.S., fiscal policy developments around the world, we're just going to be focused on achieving our goals and moving monetary policy to do that.
There is a school on Wall Street and elsewhere that says you should not raise rates because the economy still needs additional stimulus. And they look at the history of the Phillips curve model that the Fed uses and say that you kept rates at zero for 7 years and got no inflation. High inflation and unemployment also coexisted in the 1970s, that basically the Phillips curve doesn't work.
Well, the Phillips curve has died many times and it's arisen at other times. I think my view of this is if we push the economy too hard for too long, inflation pressures will build up. We're seeing some of those pressures building up in parts of the economy. I think we're in a good place there, but we know from history that if the economy, again, runs too hot for too long, you're going to see imbalances, you're going to see inflation pick up. We don't want that to happen. We know from the past that high inflation is damaging. So we want to avoid that.
Lately, several of your colleagues have suggested the balance sheet might come into play later this year, and that has global Wall Street on the edge of its metaphorical chair. Is it likely you'd stop reinvestment this year? Well,
really it depends on how the economy is doing and how we assess the economic outlook. The FOMC has put out statements in the past explaining that we plan to put off the normalization of our balance sheet until normalization of the Fed funds rate is well underway. We're not there yet, but if the economy continues to perform as it has been doing, and if we have something like 3 rate increases, obviously we'll be moving closer to a point where we're going to have serious discussions around when to stop reinvestments in our portfolio and how to best do that. That's not happening right now, but I think over time it will be part of the mix of the normalization of policy.
Well, would you say you'd get the 3 rate increases out of the way before you would turn to the balance sheet?
Well, this is something that my colleagues and I will be discussing over the future meetings and come to agreement about that, and I hope provide some clarity about what we really mean by well underway. But again, it would be done in the context of an economy that's doing well, essentially achieving our goals, and where monetary policy in terms of Fed funds rate is already moved up a number of times.